Dr. Marchenghizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to talk about the origins of writing, where writing came from, and I'm just going to give you one little sort of a view within this research area of mine. Goes back, nearly 20 years in terms of how it could be that animals like us who never evolved to read, and I don't think we evolved to have language either, and I'll talk about this another time. We certainly never evolved to read. Many of us have ancestors just 2 generations back who may have been illiterate, depending on where your family came from. It is much too recent for us to have ever evolved any kind of reading sense. So what in fact has happened is that cultural evolution over time shaped letters so that they were good for our existing innate brains. And what's good for our existing innate brains is to look like nature. Letters need to look like the combinations of contours that actually happen out in natural scenes, which consists of, to first order, just opaque objects. It's just, the world is strewn about with opaque objects. So I was just going to give you a little example of just 4 kinds of contour conglomerations, and they're all going to be very similar in that they consist of 2 T's, like the letter T. And what I mean by a T is a case where you have some object, and there's an object in front of that object. And when there's an object in front of an object, well, you end up with situations like this. So you have one contour, and then there's another contour here in front, and that is making a T. And of course, there's other contours floating around here as well that you may see, but that's a T junction. This here is an L junction, which I'm not going to talk about today. And then there's Y junctions up in the corners of the room. There's Y junctions on the corner of this book. And by the way, this book is one of my 6 books. This is on the origin of art. This is, in fact, it's the cover of it. It consists of some of these junctions that come out of my research on the origins of writing. This book was co-authored with Steven Pinker, Jeffrey Miller, Brian Boyd, and myself, and it concerns the origin of art and a 6-month-plus exhibition in Mona in Tasmania, Mona Museum. So that's what a T-junction. A T-junction just refers to when an object is in front of an object and you end up with a T. All right, so now I'm going to ask, well, let's consider the different ways of combining, of having 3 junctions such that there are 2 T's within it. So it turns out there's 4 different kinds. And by just thinking about these kinds of 4 T cases where there's 3 strokes and there are 2 T's within it, and we can say, when do they happen in the world and when don't they happen in the world? We're going to find that one of them just doesn't happen in the real world very often. And then we're going to go ask, well, is that something that we find across writing systems as well? So let's just go through the 4. Well, one of the 4 kinds of stroke combinations that has 3 strokes, or 3 contours, and 2 T's is what you might call the capital letter I, or the letter H, the capital letter H. So in this case, we have an H, and you can see the H might be, considering the contour down here, this contour down there, that's the cross on the capital H. And then we've got one vertical side of the H and the other vertical side of the H. So that in this bottom portion of it, we end up with an H. Okay? So an H happens basically when there's 2 objects in front of an object. And that's all that's going on here. Well, another kind of case is what you might call a TF. So in this case, well, we have a junction here on top. We have a T here, and with this thing going out. And then when I put this here, then out of the stem of that T is another stem that goes up. So I'm calling this a TF, and you'll see that it's equivalent. You've got this portion here shooting out this portion, and then you have breaking up this part here, you have another one that's shooting up behind it. TFs happen when there's an object behind an object and another object behind that in this particular way. And I'm going to now skip the 3rd kind that you can see potentially on the screen here. And this is the pi case, the case of pi. And that's where you have one contour or one object with two things behind it. So here you may have, in fact, I think we only need one in this case. Just something like this will potentially do it. Now we have this contour here going down from your viewpoint, and then from this you have a shooting out here, and then from up here we have it shooting out here. We have now a pi turned on its side. Okay. So now there's the one case that I skipped. So again, pi happens when there's an object behind an object, or potentially two objects. It could have been two objects and their edges, but in this case it's one object, two parts of it behind one object. Now there's this fourth case that I skipped over. This is number 3 in this list. And it, as you try to work it out, can't be found when you put objects, solid objects, in front of other opaque solid objects. So you can try, you can say, all right, in this case, you basically need to have a contour going down, and on one side it's popping out, but on the other side of the contour, someplace else is going the other way. So I can easily make something here. I can do this like as we did before. Okay, now it goes down and I've got a contour this way, but now up here I need a contour that goes that way. But the problem is that this is already figure, so to speak, and that's ground. This is already the figure, so I can't have something going behind this because this is the thing, and this is sort of empty space, right? You can't do both. You can't make it both figure and ground, and you can play around these kinds of things, and it's going to be a very rare configuration of contours that basically cannot happen, or can only very rarely happen, with three-dimensional objects, opaque objects strewn about in three-dimensional scenes. All right, so the nice thing about these, I mean, what we did in the research was we looked over all 36 different contour combinations that have 3 contours intermingling with them. And there are 36 of these topologically distinct kinds, and then we can measure them out in nature. How common are they in various different kinds of natural scenes, and then we can compare them across 115 different kinds of writing systems over human history. But this is sort of a nice sort of special subcase in that we've got 4 cases, each with 3 strokes, each of them having 2 T's within it. And so in some sense, they're all kind of vaguely similar in complexity. They're not that different in terms of the kind of motor complexity of what it would be to actually write it. But it turns out that one of these is disproportionately rare compared to the other 3. And so the question is, what this hypothesis would predict is that the rare one should be rare across writing systems. And the reason that it should be rare across writing systems is because it doesn't happen in the real world. As complicated as your brain might be, your brain is good at processing the kinds of stimuli that exist in the actual world. Stimuli that you don't find in the natural world, whether they be barcodes or other weird kinds of fractal patterns, or this number 3 case, which is just an unusual case, you cannot process as well. Maybe it's more complex in some Platonic sense or less complex in some Platonic sense. That doesn't matter. What makes something complex is whether it's ecologically rare. If it's ecologically rare, then you will have mechanisms that don't process it as well, so it'll be harder to process and feel more complex. And thus, when writing systems culturally evolve, they'll avoid that one because you're less able to process it. You'll be less able to do it, less quickly able to do it. You won't be able to absorb words and whole sentences as quickly as we do, so that it feels like an instinct, even though it's not. If you're interested in these sorts of things, you can read my earlier book, Vision Revolution. This concerns chapter 4 of Vision Revolution, my bestseller, and it consists of a variety of my discoveries in the vision domain, and the same kind of idea that culture evolved the structure of writing to fit us by looking like nature also applies to the sounds of language itself, to spoken language. We never evolved to have language. Language itself culturally evolved to sound like events, which is almost always of solid objects. And that I take up in my book that came after that called Harnessed. And it also argues about the origins of music, which sounds like humans moving in our midst. I'll talk about these different facets of these research areas and books at a future time. And that was your science moment.